Welcome to the Work Awesome podcast. This is episode 11, Setting Goals for Your Career. Today I have Elise Smith, who has been on the podcast before. She is one of our HR business partners at AVIAN. And John. John is one of our remote employees, and you're in Tennessee, correct?
Yeah, down here in Memphis.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Always say I'm going to visit for some barbecue, so that's got to happen
Come on
soon.
down.
Should set a goal to do that, Ian.
Ooh, yeah. John, your official title is Senior Systems Engineer. So do you want to give a little background on what that means and what your role for the company is?
Sure. Systems engineering being the management of requirements for a system, and it's the management of the design over its life cycle. So there's all sorts of ways to chop it up. There's different, depending on who you are, where you are, who you work for, different roles in different projects. For me, though, my current role is coming up with a new start project, completely utilizing model-based systems engineering. So trying to do all our systems engineering activities within the model-based environment, including all those digital engineering tools, trying to connect everything together to enable the trade space decisions to be more accurate and to quickly identify issues, areas of risk, and just overall management of that design maturation.
Yeah. So if all of that just went over your head, because John's super smart and does a lot of technical work, we actually have another podcast called the Model Vision Podcast, where we talk specifically about systems engineering and model-based systems engineering. We break down pretty much everything that John just said, and you can get a lot more details on what that type of work is and how it can, or how we are supporting our customers and how we hope to support future customers using model-based systems engineering and systems engineering. I think that was a pretty good plug, right? Yeah, that's great. All right, so let's move on to today's topic, setting goals. Quickly, the description: setting goals for your career is potentially one of the most important things you can do. Goals can prove constant progression and allow you to prove to yourself that you're attaining what you've set out to accomplish. Let's face it, without setting goals, a career can be mundane or dull, and that's something nobody wants. In this episode, we'll chat about setting goals for your career and potential outcome the potential outcome you could have because of it. I'm missing some words in my sentences here, though. That's interesting. Sorry about that when I sent the email. All right, so let's just jump into the first question. And again, I'm like super disorganized on this episode. So let's talk quickly behind the scenes. We recorded the first 10 episodes of the Work Awesome podcast in like March. So it's been some time since we recorded. It's now June. Yep. So we're getting back into the swing of things with this podcast series. So my disorganization is because of that. But the first question I have for you guys, and Elise, you can kind of cheat here. What are SMART goals? SMART goals let me let you answer. What are SMART goals?
So SMART goals is an acronym that we use in, I would say, the HR world to help you set kind of solid goals. So the acronym stands for specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-based. So there's just 5 things to keep in mind as you're setting goals. It's basically the difference between saying something like, I will be better at my job, versus a very specific, I will onboard employees consistently in 30 minutes or something like that, right, where it's a very specific goal that we can measure, and it's easier to hold you accountable and to see how you performed to that goal when you keep the SMART acronym in mind.
Yeah, and this is definitely something I struggled with coming out of college and like first jumping into the professional world, where it's like some of my goals were not specific and not time-based and not super relevant. I mean, I think I remember setting a goal for myself of, I want to do better with time management. And it's like, all right, cool.
How?
So what does that mean?
Yeah.
How? Let's be more specific.
When will you do better?
Yeah. So SMART goals are definitely something at AVIAN that we have been pushing pretty hard. We'll talk more about the AVIAN, how that all the AVIAN goal system and how we're using it as a company.
For AVIAN, the goal trap that a lot of employees fall into, and for good reason, is that they want to please their customer. So they'll make a goal of I'll please my customer, or my customer will be satisfied with my performance. It's too broad though, so we need them to think about how and specifically when and what they're going to do to improve the overall customer happiness.
Yeah. John, anything about SMART goals? And I also forgot to mention, John, I don't know if you remember this, but this episode was your idea. So at AVIAN, again, we'll talk about it a little bit in a little while. We have this whole goal system set up where we put in our goals, we make sure we're tracking to them. And right around that time, John was like, hey, I think this would actually be a really good episode for the Work Awesome podcast. So any thoughts on SMART goals? No.
Yes, I guess several. So one, we talked about using this at Avian, and so we mentioned that it's used within HR, across the country. I use this exact the SMART system, setting up goals when I worked for Navera as a government employee. So like everyone said, just trying to make sure that you don't just say like a New Year's resolution, right? Like I want to lose weight, or I want to be happier, or I want to read more, right? So trying to make sure that you actually set things very specific and achievable, right? So that way, at the end, when you do your self-assessment, you can write about how well you did or what value you added by accomplishing those goals.
Yeah. And I like the point, Elise, that you brought up about the goals trap, because for Avian, we do have like this overarching, we want to make sure that we're creating raving fans and we're doing all this stuff for our customers. So it's very easy for us to sit down and be like, all right, my goal is to make sure my customer is a raving fan. And like you said, it's like, well, how are you going to do that? How and what time frame? How is that going to be measurable? So making sure that we're hitting all those points in that SMART acronym. And I think, and at least maybe you can talk more to this, but I think you have to hit all of the points, not just one or two of the points, right?
Yep, you need to hit all 5.
Yeah. So that's goal setting 101, SMART goals. If you want to do more research on that, it's all over the internet. So definitely just search SMART goals. My next question, a little bit more broad, why should we set goals? What does that do for our career? John or Elise, do you have thoughts on that?
Sure. I don't mind going first. I think, we already mentioned, wanting to be better or do more good, right? So what does that mean? I think using, a system like SMART is great, but why do you want to do it? So for me personally, I find it good to sit down and look ahead, not only to look ahead, but also to look back on what you've done previously, do a self-reflection of how you could have done better, and then, take action, right? So you want to do better. So how you're going to get better? So these goals, goals can help you do that. They can help you, you don't have to accomplish it all at once, right? You can chop it up into, with SMART time-based, right? So within 3 months, I want to be here, instead of trying to set it, in 5 years, I want to be here, right? So some of these goals, I feel like I've chopped them up to where they're almost building blocks to the, near-term, long-term goals. Short-term, I think, is another, some of the references we were looking at. So building on those, making sure that you're professionally healthy and you're personally healthy, right? Making sure you're progressing your career and also, satisfying your employer, your customer, whomever you might be working for.
I think right along those lines, setting goals and actually writing them down does a couple of things. One, it holds you accountable. So once you set them, you actually write them down somewhere and you're looking at them at various intervals, you're going to be thinking about how you're going to achieve those. It's not going to be something you say you're going to do, but actually don't follow through on, because now they're written down and you're going to hold yourself accountable. And the other thing I think it does is it's a great communication tool, especially if you're sharing your goals with your manager. So you can make sure you're on the right track. Where you think you should be focusing to grow your career might be different from what your manager has in mind. So by writing down your goals, and we'll kind of get into what we do at AVIAN, but having your manager review them with you, your career goals anyways, you can make sure that you're on the same page. So when you get to the end of the year and you're like, I did these 5 awesome things and I nailed all my goals, then your manager's not like, well, none of that's relevant for your customers, so it's not actually helpful. So it's a great communication tool.
Yeah, and you guys are hitting on a lot of points that I want to bring up at some point during this discussion, but the short-term, long-term goals, the where should you start, and to dive into that question a little bit more, talking with your manager and figuring out where they see you going is a great place to start. We'll get back to that in a second. What else? How we use goals at AVIAN, we'll get back to that. I keep saying that. But yeah, I think setting goals in general, you can kind of almost set a roadmap for your career. So say you're just coming out of college and your overarching big plan for future you is to be, I don't know, the CEO of a company someday. Well, there's obviously going to be goals along that way that you have to make sure you're hitting. So sitting down saying, all right, this is my 1-year plan, 2-year plan, 5-year plan, 10-year plan, and making sure that you're hitting those milestones within that plan. That is super big picture. You can obviously, and maybe now's the time to bring up the difference between short-term and long-term goals, but there's milestones that you have to hit. So for 2 years, maybe, or 5 years even, maybe your goal is to get a master's degree, and then that helps you progress your career to doing something else. But let's jump into that question. What to you guys is the difference between short-term and long-term goals?
Sure. To me, I think a short-term goal is anything that's happening within a year or less. And then I would say anything beyond that, at definitely 2 to 5 years and beyond, is a long-term goal.
Yeah, I guess I'll add to thinking. Yeah, for me, I'm still trying to figure out what I want to be when I grow up, right? So sometimes long-term goals can be difficult, right? So planning out a year ahead is, I'm not going to say it's overwhelming, but just still, it's like I don't know where I'm going to be in a year. So I'm with you. A lot of times too, when especially tracking professional goals within a company, you usually set goals for the year, right? So trying to figure out how, I mentioned trying to break them up into chunks, right? So I guess one strategy could be using those short-term goals as those chunks, right? So if the long-term or the overarching goal is a year, breaking it up into 2 or 3 month periods, especially if you're talking about taking training, if you're dependent on someone else, doing something, if it's approving that training, getting funding for it, actually going to it, right? If it's not towards the end of the year, all those I think come into for me to play when I try and weigh out what's near term versus long term.
Yeah, and I do want to make the point that short term goals are not like your daily to-do list. That's just a list of things that you're trying to get done in your day. Short term is, like John just said, like that 3 month period, that 6 month period. I actually like the 3 months a lot because then you can chunk your years into quarters and make sure you're hitting like quarterly goals. Whereas long term is probably over a year, 2 years, 3 years. But like John said, again, you don't know what you're doing in 3 years. So maybe the goals that you're hitting determine what happens in that next year. Long term might be best to stick to like a year. You can have an overall, like I was talking about earlier, you can have an overall roadmap for where you see your career going. But those goals really need to be set on a yearly basis. Agree?
Yeah. And you mentioned like a big goal of like achieving a master's degree. You could set that goal like within 2 years, I'm going to start into a program, and then break it down even further. Within a year, I'm going to have identified programs of interest or something like that.
Yeah. So let's talk about, I want to save AVIAN for last. So let's talk about where we should start with goals. And I brought up the point where like maybe you sit down with your manager, see what their goals for you are, and then you can kind of structure your goals around that. Where else do you guys think is a good place to start?
One idea to consider is to look at your pain points that you've had during the year, because one area of growth for me is not repeating just mistakes or things that didn't go well, trying to set a path forward where I'm not going to repeat mistakes, or just to grow myself so I can handle situations differently. So look at your pain points and kind of identify what didn't go so well in the last year or so, and what can you do to improve that? If you're struggling as a manager, can you go to manager training? If you really annoyed your customer a couple of times. Is there something you can focus on with that customer to improve that relationship? Things like that.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, definitely agree. I mentioned so one of the big things with agile system management, you do a lot of retrospectives, right? You do something for a period of time, you present what you do, and then usually as a team, as a group, you stop and you look back at what you did and what went well, what didn't, right? So I think that's a lot of the pain points you mentioned. I think that's very synonymous where you sure you made a mistake. Making mistakes is okay, but taking action to help prevent those mistakes from happening again is definitely a theme of what I think could help set or be
And maybe
potential
you had a
goals.
stellar year and you didn't have any pain points. Try to think of how you can still grow yourself.
Mm-hmm.
What more can you learn? What more can you do to progress yourself within your role?
Yeah, because believe me when I say there's always more that you can learn as far as being an overall professional or a very specific targeted, this is my job, these are the disciplines I follow. You probably don't know everything, so there's definitely more to learn at all times.
And feel free to use Google. I
Yeah.
mean, I've Googled my own position to see what are other HR business partners working on. And then I kind of learn, okay, there might be a gap over here that I haven't focused on yet. I also have used our human capital plan that we released this year to see what parts of HR we talked about in our human capital plan that I'm not strong at, and then I can focus in that area for my own learning and development.
So that's an interesting point, and maybe you can talk more about it, but we switched structures for our HR team pretty recently. And when that happened, were there you just said you did some research on like what other HR business partners are doing in the industry. Were there as soon as we made that switch, were there goals that you set for yourself to help you progress in this new role?
My first goal that I set for myself was to kind of develop a relationship with George, my sector VP, because this was the first time we had broken out into sectors. And each of us was assigned to work with a sector VP. So we were learning what our sector VP needed from us, how we could be strategic with them. And so that was one of my first immediate goals.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, even again, along the lines of what we did with the HR team where we split it up, when that happens, maybe a negative thing in your mind, but really spin it to a positive where you're continuing to learn, you're continuing to develop relationships with other people that you may not have talked with before, and set some of those goals that are going to help you achieve more in the new role that you have. All right, let's talk about goals specifically at AVIAN. So at AVIAN, we use a system called ADP. It's a pretty popular system. So if you've heard of it before, not surprised. But within ADP, there's a whole goal system that we are utilizing now. Elise, you can probably talk to it better than I can, so feel free to jump in.
Yes, so we do have the performance management tools in ADP, and we are utilizing that. We're able to kind of custom our review cycles, so we get to decide how, when, what kind of questions we want to do. So what we've been doing here at AVIAN is that we do an annual review, and we kind of shift that to one time period. So it's not based on anyone's anniversary date, really. It's just a specific time in the year. And then we're also doing a mid-year checkpoint. And all the mid-year checkpoint really is to make sure that you have those goals in the system. So we just released that for this year on June 1st. So the employees could have already gone in and put their goals into the system. They can do that at any point, but we like to have this reminder period for the employees to make sure they have those in, and the managers to take a look and have a discussion with their employees about their goals.
Yeah, so ADP it's really cool because you can track everything within the platform. You can set those long-term goals, but then also set kind of sub goals as milestones to make sure throughout. So say it's a goal that you're trying to hit within a certain year, you can say, all right, at the 3-month period, I want to make sure I'm on track and hitting this point or this milestone. At the 6 months, I want to hit this milestone, and make sure that you're really tracking to that long-term goal. What you don't want to do is set that goal and then just completely forget about it and not do anything to attain that goal throughout the year. John, go ahead.
That being said, the tool also has a feature where you can mark the goal as having an obstacle. So that was probably really important over like a COVID period where maybe your goal was to go to a specific training and then the training was canceled. So you can actually put that in the system. This goal had obstacles and explain what they were.
Yeah. And John, outside of the HR team and outside of the corporate team, I want your honest thoughts on the ADP tool. Did it help you set goals? Did it help you achieve the goals that you set? What are your thoughts there?
I do. I'm going to indirectly answer your question. I'll say I find goals setting, identifying, setting, making sure you have all the attributes of the goal. I find that easier to do. I guess it's more obvious where I really, and I think the tool, your question, does the tool enable that? Yes, yeah. I think it does. Where I personally struggle is those self-assessments, right? When you got to sit down and write, and I met the goal, but it's really hard for me. Like, I'm not great at writing, especially about myself. So has nothing to do with the tool, but it's more with the process. That's just trying to, sit down, remember what you did, and maybe, with each person being so unique and supporting different roles and different customers, it's me trying to explain what I did to someone who may not be as familiar or directly related to the project can be difficult. So trying to do that, quickly, succinctly, but also, showing the breadth and depth of your work. It's just, for me, that's definitely, maybe a goal I need to work on.
Yeah, I can definitely see the challenge there. And I guess, so when we did the self-assessments, was that before, do you remember if that was before or after we set up that goal system last year? I can't remember.
We kind of did some practice goals.
Yeah.
The assessment, we kind of practiced going through them, but
so I guess
people weren't accountable really for their goals that year.
I guess my point there would have been I think the two together are going to make that process a lot easier. So you have those goals that you set for yourself, and during that self-assessment, now we can just directly talk about the goals. So even if we don't I'm in the same boat as you. I don't like talking about myself in my self-assessment. So I can at least now refer back to those goals and be like, yes, I achieved that goal. Here's how I achieved it. Here's the results that are hitting those SMART goal points, making sure that I'm explaining how it was measurable, how I attained it, how it was done in a timely manner, and all of that stuff that we talked about at the beginning. Does that make sense?
Basically, you have an opportunity to explain it versus trying to write it out in a way that is going to be understood by your manager because of the one-on-one meetings that we're conducting.
Yeah. The other thought I had, and John, do you play video games? I play video games still.
Not as much as I just don't have the time, but yes. Probably, not any recent, but we can go back and pull out some archives.
My point here was that I think goals help kind of gamify your life a little bit. So you're in Call of Duty, you have all these achievements that you're trying to attain. Same thing with goals. Now you're setting these customized goals for basically your life, your professional life, that you are attaining as you're going through. So if you think about it that way, you can make it a little bit fun for yourself. And maybe when you attain X goal, you reward yourself by taking a vacation or doing something fun. I think gamifying goals, it could help a lot of people.
You see that the use of achievements or a similar setup on a lot of other tools now too, right? Especially, go set up your profile, right? And it's like, okay, you get an achievement for setting a profile picture or, filling in your contact info. So I think that immediate, somewhat, free euphoric chemical release in your brain. You see, you did it, right?
So,
I was gonna say Nectar had that where you completed the profile, you put up your picture, and you got I think 50 points or something, which points relate to dollars, and there's a whole thing there. I think Nectar could be maybe not Nectar specifically, but peer-to-peer recognition could be another topic we talk about sometime. Besides that, any last points that you guys want to make about setting goals for your career or just goals in general?
I think the more often you do it, the more comfortable it will become.
Yes.
And do what you can do to remember to check in on your goals as well. So if you need to set a meeting maker up once a quarter to check in on your goals, to remind yourself what you're supposed to be working on, that might be a helpful trick.
Yeah, definitely.
One thing maybe to add, so looking at SMART and it's, the pieces here, something, and this may be more relevant to personal goals, but make sure, I guess, realistic. I guess this fits into attainable, right? So like, you don't want to put like, I want to be the best at something, right? Because, and especially within a short amount of time, it's just difficult. So I'm not going to say the negative downside of failing your goals, right? But like, make sure that what you set out
Reachable.
Reachable, yeah.
is an actual,
Yeah. I definitely
reachable.
agree. And
Yeah.
even if you don't reach a goal, I don't think that's always a negative thing. I think it just is a time for you to reevaluate what you did do and maybe how close you got to that goal, what you could have gone differently to achieve the goal, and really just learn from the whole experience. All right. I think that is it for this episode. So John and Elise, thank you for joining me. On the next episode, we're talking about community resources. So these are organizations in your community that are here to help you find a job or further your career. We'll get into that on the next episode. Again, John, Elise, thank you for joining me, and I'll see everybody next time.
Thanks, Ian.
Hey guys, thanks for watching this video on YouTube. I just want to jump in and say that if you are not following the Work Awesome Network on all social media platforms, I highly encourage that. It's the place to get updates on blog posts, on new episodes, on basically anything related to the Work Awesome Network. So jump over to wherever you get your content from: Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. We're on all the platforms. If you are interested, we also publish these same episodes on audio platforms, so you can listen to it on Spotify, Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, and pretty much anywhere you get your podcast. So if you would rather listen to this in an audio format in the car, on the way to work, in the office, I encourage you to jump over to those audio platforms and listen there. I also want to say, if you're interested in learning about the company behind the Work Awesome Network, AVIAN, you can jump over to the AVIAN website at avian.com, AVIAN.com. Thanks again for watching this video. Please leave a comment, like, and subscribe. It helps the video out. It helps it get in front of more people. Thank you again. And now back to this episode.